Is this supposed to be hard? Or are you just bad at your job? That was the first thing Claire said to the alien standing at the podium, and it rippled through the lecture hall like someone had set off a low yo-yo grenade. Dozens of eyes in every shape and number imaginable swiveled toward her. The instructor, a tall, silvery-skinned Zellerin, whose long fingers drummed a slow rhythm against a console, paused mid-sentence. His voice was like cold metal being drawn across glass. Cadet Human, you may want to reconsider your tone. You have not yet encountered question 3. Claire leaned back in her chair, folding her arms with the casual confidence of someone who had already made up her mind about how this day would go. The Interstellar Academy's cognitive trial of applied tactical reasoning was infamous. It was said that no one in recorded history had made it past the third question without error. Entire species with centuries of strategic warfare experience had broken against it like ships on rocks. The test wasn't just questions. It was a simulation-based sequence that adapted to your every choice. The first 2 questions lulled you into thinking you could solve it. The third destroyed you. And now, on this cold gray morning in a chamber lined with projection screens and graviton emitters, the room's attention was fixed on the one human in the cohort, Claire. The first 2 scenarios had appeared on the consoles embedded in each desk. The first was a basic logistics problem. Allocate resources to prevent a famine in a 3-moon colony. Claire had solved it in 19 seconds flat, barely looking up from the display. The second was a misdirection exercise. Identify the real threat vector among 20 false signals. She tapped her response in 8 seconds, humming softly. Now came the infamous third. The instructor's fingers tapped a command and the screens flickered. A new interface formed. Layers of topography, troop positions, climate simulations, and encrypted communications flooded the field of view. It was the kind of visual complexity that left most cadets blinking just to make sense of it. This, the instructor said, is where every mind breaks. Every calculation you make will alter every variable in real time. You will fail. Claire's brow furrowed, but not in confusion. She tilted her head like she was listening for a faint sound. Oh, she murmured. It's just a dynamic, heuristic cascade. Your weighting system's biased toward its own feedback loops. That's cute. She started moving her fingers over the holographic keys, not hesitantly, but like a pianist who already knew the song. The map shifted, comm lines rerouted, units redeployed. The instructor's eyes, iridescent and unblinking, narrowed slightly. The alien cadets exchanged glances, antennae twitching and mandibles clicking in low disbelief. The simulation began to react aggressively, throwing impossible scenarios in rapid succession. Storms cutting off supply lines, sudden rebellions, quantum interference scrambling navigation. Claire moved faster. Her lips twitched into the faintest smile. The kind you wore when a puzzle finally gave you something interesting. On the instructor's console, red indicators, normally a steady march toward failure, blinked and then vanished. Variables stabilized. The system began throwing even more complex compound events, and she handled them with the same brisk rhythm, pivoting from one to the next without hesitation. 2 minutes in, the instructor leaned forward, his voice tightening. Impossible. She is on question 4. The words weren't meant for the class, but they carried. Now every head was turned toward her, and she wasn't even glancing at them, her eyes tracking shifting graphs and cascading probabilities like they were a children's puzzle. Question 5 arrived, then 6, then 10. Her hands moved in a blur, the console's holographic interface pulsing under her touch. There was no hesitation between inputs, only seamless transitions, as though she had already run the whole program in her mind. Question 12, the instructor said aloud, voice flat now, as if speaking to himself. He stopped announcing after that. The cadets stopped breathing as often. Even the room's environmental hum seemed quieter. Question 20. Question 30. The instructor had gone still, hands resting flat on the console, watching her like a naturalist who had just realized the creature he was studying wasn't prey. Claire didn't look up until she reached 47. And even then, she only paused to roll her shoulders. You going to blink at some point? She asked him. The alien's eyes did in fact flicker closed once almost involuntarily, and the room, silent for the last 10 minutes, felt charged with the awareness that whatever record had existed for this trial had just been torn apart. Claire didn't stop. The simulation's shifting colors painted her face in alternating pulses of amber, green, and deep red as each scenario crashed into the next. The alien cadets had given up pretending to focus on their own terminals. Some leaned forward, mandibles clicking softly, others curling their tails or antennae in restless disbelief. The Zelleran instructor remained behind his console, but his posture was no longer that of someone waiting for an inevitable failure. Now he looked like someone watching the end of a legend he'd believed unshakable. By question 50, the simulation had stopped following recognizable military or logistical logic. It was feeding her deliberately contradictory orders, forcing her to manage two crises that negated each other's solutions. A supply chain breakdown on one front would only stabilize if she allowed a critical communication satellite to be destroyed on the other. Any species that had trained for this test would falter here, burned out by mental whiplash. Claire didn't even slow. She rerouted supply lines through a half-abandoned asteroid mining network, then repurposed debris from the destroyed satellite as decoys to draw enemy forces off course. Her solutions came so fast the system began cueing its curveballs before she'd even finished inputting her last command. On the instructor's console, streams of data scrolled in alien script, tracking her accuracy and adaptation speed. The numbers didn't just exceed norms. They had begun moving outside the scale entirely. The Zelleran's skin tone shifted faintly toward an iridescent blue, the way his kind did when they were forced to reevaluate something they thought immutable. By the time she hit question 60, the simulation abandoned traditional tactics entirely and threw her into a first contact scenario with a hostile but unknown species. There were no protocols, no historical models, just raw, incomplete data. Claire's fingers paused for the first time, not from confusion, but because she wanted to think for exactly 3 seconds before acting. Then she rewrote the communications array to piggyback signals onto the enemy's own scanning pulses, sending fragments of cultural data disguised as sensor noise. As the alien ships adapted, she changed the frequency, feeding them an evolving picture of a species that appeared simultaneously capable of overwhelming force and desperate for peaceful trade. The simulation hesitated, as if its predictive engine needed to catch its breath. When the screen flared with the word, "stabilized," the room broke into a low, disbelieving murmur. In hundreds of trials across dozens of worlds, no cadet had ever stabilized an unscripted first contact threat on the first try. The instructor raised one elongated hand for silence. Continue. Question 70 came like a thunderclap. An asteroid belt collapse had sent millions of tons of rock hurtling toward a populated planet while an unrelated insurgency erupted across its largest city. Each problem needed full attention to resolve. Choosing either one first would doom the other. Claire didn't choose. She split the simulation's processing into parallel threads, one handling evacuation logistics, the other running predictive models for gravitational tug drones. In the real world, splitting focus like that was a recipe for catastrophic oversight. In the simulation, her coordination was flawless, every keystroke adjusting both crises in harmony until, impossibly, neither failed. The alien cadet to her left, a tall insectoid with compound eyes, finally spoke, his voice dry and faint. "She is playing with it." Claire didn't correct him. In truth, she was playing. Not because the simulation was easy, but because it was finally giving her something worth her full attention. Question 80 blurred into question 90 with no perceptible shift in her pace. Each new crisis built on the last, stacking into a tower of near-impossible complexity. The alien cadets who had been snickering at the human at the start of the trial were now staring, as though they'd been watching a predator they thought extinct suddenly stand before them. By 95, the instructor spoke again, voice stripped of the cold arrogance from before. "Human, your neural throughput is anomalous." Claire didn't look up. "I had good teachers." That wasn't entirely true, at least not in the way he meant it. She'd grown up solving problems the way her grandmother solved dinner with nothing in the fridge, or the way her father rerouted entire power grids after a storm without waiting for official clearance. Years of adapting faster than instructions could arrive had wired her brain to see systems as something you could bend, twist, and reassemble before anyone noticed you'd touched them. Question 100 arrived. For most, it was ceremonial, a point no one reached, an unreachable summit. The simulation pulled in everything it had thrown at her before, layering it into a living, shifting storm of crisis, chaos, and contradiction. She didn't blink. As her hands moved, the instructor found himself stepping closer to watch. His own console abandoned, his eyes tracked her fingers, the rhythm of her inputs, the micropauses she used not to hesitate, but to see 3 or 4 consequences ahead. The Academy's records would later show that question 100 took her 52 seconds. When the console chimed and advanced to 101, the instructor's throat plates flexed in something dangerously close to awe. And still, Claire did not slow. Question 101 opened with a landscape so chaotic it almost seemed like the simulation had broken. Multiple theaters of operations sprawled across a dozen worlds. Wars in progress, collapsing ecosystems, civil unrest, and uncharted spatial anomalies all overlaid on a single navigational grid. Resources were scarce, time even scarcer. Any standard cadet would have stared at it long enough for the system to declare failure. Claire began segmenting the view, dragging translucent panes to partition the chaos into manageable zones. Her eyes flicked between them in a metronomic pattern, inputting strings of commands that rippled outward in a chain reaction of stabilizing events. The alien cadets whispered in tones so low they were almost subsonic, the sound of disbelief passing between species. The instructor had stopped issuing commentary altogether. His fingers hovered over his own interface, not to intervene, but to record. He had realized what was unfolding wasn't just a record. It was something no one would believe without evidence. By question 110, the simulation adapted again. This time, it injected unknown variables at random intervals. Rogue actors, betrayal from supposed allies, equipment failure in critical systems. Claire responded by creating redundancies that preempted failure before it struck. As if she'd predicted the sabotage before the simulation even rolled it into play. She used small, low-value assets to lure the betrayals early, then cut them off cleanly without risking core stability. Her tactics weren't brute force. They were surgical, precise. A misplaced decoy ship here. A calculated overextension there. Moves that would look like errors to an untrained eye, but were bait for the simulation's own adaptive algorithms. She was not just surviving it. She was making it dance to her tempo. The alien to her right, a crystalline-bodied Vaith with refractive skin, leaned slightly toward the insectoid cadet on her other side. "Is it possible she has interfaced with the system?" he murmured. "No," the insectoid said without taking his eyes off her hands. "It is possible she is human." Question 120 brought a scenario no one in the room recognized. A black zone anomaly creeping across known space, erasing star systems without explosion or debris. It was pure abstraction. No weapon, no enemy, just void consuming reality. The simulation offered no tactical options. Claire stared at it for a moment, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then she began rerouting her previous operations, civil evacuations, fleet redeployments, economic triage, into a single coordinated movement. She abandoned entire quadrants, but only after stripping them of anything useful in pushing that mass toward the one corridor the void could not yet reach. Within minutes, she turned the anomaly from an unstoppable spread into a slow, predictable crawl. The instructor's eyes glimmered with a faint bioluminescence. "You saw the shape of it." "Everything has a shape," Claire replied without looking up. Question 130 tested social cohesion. The simulation threw her into a post-crisis government where dozens of factions, all technically on the same side, were tearing themselves apart over scarce resources. For most cadets, this phase ended in deadlock, the simulation marking it as a failure of diplomacy. Claire didn't bother appealing to logic or morality. She manipulated the flow of supplies and intelligence so that no faction could afford to weaken another without weakening itself. A fragile unity emerged, born not of trust, but of interdependence. The program flagged it as stable. The alien cadets had stopped shifting in their seats. Now they sat utterly still, caught between awe and a quiet fear. Claire wasn't simply breaking records. She was demonstrating that the test's designers had failed to imagine someone who could unmake its rules. By 140, the simulation shifted tone. It no longer tried to overwhelm her, tried to corner her. Crisis unfolded faster, less predictably. The interface's colors deepened. The transitions grew sharper, almost hostile. Claire leaned in, her hands a blur. She was adapting to the tempo shift instantly, responding to each jab with a counter that turned the system's aggression against itself. A pirate raid on a key trade route became bait for an enemy fleet, which she then funneled into a gravitational trap meant for her own forces. An agricultural collapse on one moon was solved by rerouting bioengineered crops originally meant for an entirely different planet. Every solution was recycled into the next advantage. The instructor moved closer, his voice low but clear. Human, the system is not infinite. It will escalate beyond safety. Then it will be interesting, she said. 150 arrived like the crest of a wave, an all-scenario convergence. Every variable, every crisis she had faced so far came back in an evolved form, layered over one another until the map looked like an abstract painting of chaos. Her first move was counterintuitive. She froze all but one of her operational zones. The simulation reacted instantly, flooding the active zone with overwhelming pressure. In the moment before collapse, she used the chaos there to mask an interzone transfer of assets, unbalancing the system's predictive modeling. When she reactivated the frozen zones, they lit up in synchronized recovery, leaving the simulation scrambling to adjust. The alien cadets gasped, not at the brilliance of the tactic, but at the realization that she had just done something the simulation's own documentation claimed was impossible. The system's timer ticked down. Question 151 flashed on the screen, and Claire's hands were already moving. Question 151 was not a scenario in the normal sense. The projection screens dissolved into a single endless starfield. No crises, no fleets, no maps, just space, empty, silent, expectant. The console displayed a single line of alien script. Define victory. The alien cadets stirred, whispering uncertainly. This was not part of the test. Even the instructor tilted his head, translucent eyelids narrowing. This is not procedural, he murmured. The system has never. Claire didn't wait for him to finish. Her gaze swept the empty field. So you've run out of games, she said softly. She tapped the console, bringing up ghostly overlays of all previous scenarios, condensed into a shifting, layered web of crises and outcomes. With a flick of her wrist, she folded them together, compressing every victory, loss, and compromise into a single fluid network. Victory, she said aloud, isn't an end state. It's the ability to choose what happens next. She keyed in her definition not as a single answer, but as a persistent algorithm, one that could adapt to new variables without end. The starfield shifted, points of light clustered into patterns, moving in harmony like a vast and deliberate choreography. The console chimed, not the usual sharp tone of advancement, but a low, resonant note that seemed to hum in the bones. Question 152 formed instantly. Now the starfield contained fleets, hers and enemies, arrayed across contested space. But instead of fixed positions, every ship was in motion, responding to invisible cues. There were no fixed rules for movement. Claire's hands were already in motion, interpreting the unseen signals. The enemy fleet wasn't random. It was following a rhythm, subtle but repeating. She shifted her own formations to mirror, then counter, then subtly lead. In under a minute, the enemy's movements aligned with hers. Like dancers following a partner they didn't realize was guiding them. The system flagged the engagement as resolved without a shot fired. The instructor's voice was hushed. You did not defeat them. I didn't have to, she replied. 153 dropped her into a planet-wide crisis. Civil breakdown, hostile occupation, and catastrophic environmental collapse all at once. Claire looked at the interlaced problems and instead of prioritizing one, created a feedback loop where each solution fueled the others. Hostile troops were redirected into stabilizing infrastructure because it served their survival. Environmental repair was accelerated by civilian labor freed from fighting. The occupation dissolved because the line between occupier and rescuer blurred until it vanished. The simulation's difficulty curve spiked at 155. Variables changed mid-input. Solutions that should have worked broke instantly. Claire responded by abandoning the idea of permanent fixes altogether, treating every solution as temporary scaffolding to keep momentum alive until the next adjustment. The system's adaptive engine struggled, then began chasing her moves instead of countering them. By 160, the alien cadets realized something profound. The simulation was no longer testing her. It was learning from her. The instructor stepped forward, his shadow crossing her console. Human, this is not a trial anymore. It is evolution. Claire didn't stop moving. Then I guess we're both getting graded. Question 170 presented the entire galaxy as a single interdependent system. Every choice in one region rippled into countless others. Failure in one corner meant collapse everywhere. Claire worked without hesitation, treating the galaxy like a living organism, redirecting flows of trade, migration, diplomacy, and even conflict in a way that kept the whole alive. The starfield dimmed. The console went still. For the first time since question 1, the simulation stopped. The instructor approached slowly. The trial has no more scenarios. Claire sat back, flexing her fingers. Then it's over. A soft chime sounded. On every screen, a final message appeared in the neutral font of the Academy's core systems. Completion. 200 questions resolved. No recorded errors. Gasp swept the room. 200 was a theoretical limit buried in the program's code, a number no one had reached because no one had come close. The alien cadets stared at her as if she'd rewritten the laws of physics. The instructor stood silently for several seconds, then extended one long-fingered hand in a gesture rare for his species. Cadet Claire, your performance will be entered into the Academy archives under a classification I have never used. What classification? She asked, shaking his hand. He paused. Not a candidate, not a record holder, an event. She allowed herself a thin smile. Well, that's one way to spend a morning. As the cadets filed out, still murmuring in disbelief, Claire remained seated for a moment longer, glancing at the inert console. Somewhere in its hidden layers of code, the simulation was still running her algorithms, folding them into its vast library of tactical thought. She had a feeling that the next time anyone took the trial, the third question wouldn't be the one to fear anymore, because question 3 had just been replaced by everything she'd left behind.